Would you like to trim a little fat off your food budget? Or would you like to turn it into a streamlined hunk of efficiency and frugality? Either way, I think you will find a lot of value in this episode. Hello and welcome to the Valiant Growth Podcast. I'm your host Philip Frey, and today we will be talking about adding frugality to the groceries list. So, why save on food? Is it a bad thing to spend on food? Is it a bad thing to enjoy a nice meal or the great service of a restaurant? I don't think it is. And if that is a major source of joy for you, there's no reason to beat yourself up over spending 10 or 20 times $2 a day. To me, this is a question of priorities. The big picture of frugality is always about what is most important to you. You're not saving for the sake of saving. You're saving on things that don't matter so much to be able to spend on things that do matter very much. I personally chose to minimize my food budget because it means that I can save money faster, or I can work less, and in general achieve financial independence faster. Also, if you're the kind of person who enjoys optimizing things and tweaking around with things and solving problems that have a real world impact, I think you will find that food budget frugality is something that can be very fun. So the core mathematical principle to how I approach the question is, how many calories do I get per dollar or pound, actually in my case, or any unit of currency spent? So if I go out right now and I spend 1 unit of currency, how much of my life energy will that fuel? So for instance, if something has 100 calories per 100 grams and a kilogram of it costs $1, then I know that I'm getting 1,000 calories per dollar. And the same applies for non-metric situations. So let me give you a real world example here. I just picked up some prices from the website of a store, just to give you some illustrations. So if I go ahead and I buy here in Exeter a kilogram of store brand value long grain rice, I will get 6,200 calories for my dollar. If I choose the store brand basmati rice, which is a more expensive kind, I will actually only get 1,400 calories for my dollar. If I go for a more expensive brand of this basmati rice, I will get 750 calories a dollar if I buy 10 kilograms of it. If I only buy 1 kilogram of it, I get only 600 calories per dollar. Notice that we're already at 10% efficiency. If I say, okay, I'm gonna buy a microwavable pouch rice kind of thing, I'm sure you're familiar with it, and save me some time on cooking. Well, in that case, I'm getting 150 calories for my dollar. And if I go ahead and buy raspberries, surprisingly, I will get 27 calories per dollar. So whereas if I wanted to fuel a calorie budget of 2,000 calories a day, it would take me 30 cents to eat value long grain rice. If I try to do the same with a diet of only raspberries, which sounds pretty cool on paper, I would have to spend $74 for this privilege every day. And making this calculation on the fly, whether it's before you're going shopping or when you're actually in the moment, will help you see how expensive foods are relative to each other. And for some, this will be very natural, and for others, this will be a bit of a challenge. But once you do the calculation a few times, it will come pretty easily. And you can find very surprising things. So I on purpose chose an extreme example here where raspberries cost 230 times more than rice if you look at calories per currency. But to give you a more interesting example, I compared value bread, so it's kind of store brand bread, to potatoes. And you ask anybody, they will say, yeah, bread, potatoes, pretty much the same price, or pretty much the same category of how expensive it is. They're both pretty cheap foods, right? Well, turns out in my area, getting bread is actually 5 times cheaper than getting potatoes. And you would not know this without the calculation. And I started with making on-the-spot calculations, but after some time I actually built a list of foods in the store that was near me, and I built this massive spreadsheet of hundreds of foods, and I just listed them all out. And I will include this list in the show notes with some caveats. If this is London prices in February in a specific store, so they might not reflect the realities of your market or even the season you're listening to in. But you can look at it just for fun to see kind of a template and to see some general trends as far as how expensive certain foods are. And there is some sophistication to this. Sometimes they will only put cooked calories on the packaging, so they will not give you for instance with rice, they will not give you the raw number, which is what you're looking for because you're buying raw rice, not cooked rice. Sometimes they don't include the drained weight. There are certain little tricks with it, but the principle is simple, and the rest you can figure out if you get into this. So let's say you build this list, and basically the end conclusion will probably be to forget all fruits and vegetables, forget all meat, and just live on value spaghetti and mix it with sugar and oil. Well, that's the 30-cent diet. You obviously don't want to do that, and I will go into more refinement now. So the number one thing is taste. Cheaper foods aren't necessarily great tasting very often. Or to be more precise, they're generally pretty plain. And something that you can do is mix small amounts of tasty but expensive foods with a higher volume of cheaper side dishes. So for instance, chicken meat is extremely expensive if you look at what you get for what you pay. But you can mix a small amount of chicken with rice and you get some very good value meal because it balances out. Now the second concern, which is probably on your mind already, is health. So you don't want to be living on processed carbs, or maybe you don't eat them at all. So what do you do, and how do you get more healthy options into this? Well, basically you can take the same idea and apply it to whatever framework you're working in. So for instance, if you're a vegetarian, you will lose some options, but you can still use this system to figure out which vegetarian foods are cheaper than other vegetarian foods. What I did is I'm looking for a certain combination of macronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. I want to eat as healthily as possible. So what I did is I applied the same logic, but instead of doing calories per currency, I did vitamin C per currency, iron per currency. And I used this approach to mix things up and to create a diet that is not too expensive, but that's also reasonably balanced. And I'll give you again an example of why this can be so valuable. So I just checked out a random list on the internet, just for the sake of this example, for good sources of vitamin A. And two things that were on this list were mango and carrots. Now you might say, okay, I want vitamin A, so I'll just buy one of those two. Well, the thing is, to get your daily recommended value of vitamin A, you need 500 grams of mango, which will cost you $4 where I live, or you can get 30 grams of carrots for cents. That is a huge difference, and that will really be reflected in your food budget. And this is the power of this approach. So now with the maths out of the way, let's talk about some other principles on this subject. As you probably noticed, I encourage cooking. You run the numbers on eating out and you will figure out that it's very expensive in comparison. And even if you go to fast food restaurants, it's still significantly more expensive than cooking. Doesn't mean you should never eat out, but you should be conscious about what you're giving up to do it. Also, there is a point where if you earn a lot of money, the time spent on cooking you're actually losing money in the end, and it's cheaper to have someone else cook for you. In that case, ignore my advice. And you might just not like cooking so much, in which case there are certain tricks that can help you. The one thing that I do is I cook in batches. So if you're not particularly worried about variety, you can cook ahead for a number of days and then you can just eat that. You'll save a lot of time just on that. Also, cooking doesn't have to be very complicated. You can cook things very simply if that's what you're looking for. I have a friend who just mixes the ingredients, and often it's some pretty weird combinations, and it's things most people wouldn't eat together, but it works for him because for him, time is the most valuable resource and he doesn't want the hassle. So he just takes very simple ingredients, cooks them very simply, and just eats them. He treats the whole question as fuel. On the other hand, if you don't know cooking and you start learning it, you might find that it's pretty fun and you might get a lot of enjoyment out of it. You never know. And another thing that applies really well to cooking, but also to chores in general, you can always just listen to a podcast, this podcast, or an audiobook while you're doing what you're doing, and then you're basically multitasking very efficiently and it will seem much less of a sacrifice. And if you don't have experience with this, trust me that after you build a little bit of skill, cooking doesn't take long. Even with the cleanup included, it goes pretty fast if you're not making things that are very fancy. Now, when it comes to the workplace, again, you can save a lot of money by simply getting some cooked food there or making a sandwich and eating that there. And you can just avoid ordering food at the workplace again, which is terrible value for money. Now, if you work in a really fancy place where you can't do it, then you have to bite the bullet and keep ordering stuff, but just be aware that you might have a higher salary, but you're also paying for the privilege of having a higher salary. Guests are a question that I haven't figured out yet. How to feed them? The easy choice is restaurants, but again, there are alternatives. If you learn to cook a little bit, you can prepare meals for them and save a lot of money. There are questions of what is socially acceptable in these situations, but also you might want to have, especially if you have recurring friends visiting you, you might want to have people who respect your budget and don't expect you to go bankrupt over their visit. Another commonly shared tip is buying discounted things. I don't usually do this just because where I live, discounted things are still more expensive than the store brand products most of the time. But if I were looking for variety, which I'm not necessarily looking for, but if I were looking for that, I would definitely just adopt the strategy of buying whatever is discounted and learning to cook from there. You can also have special sources of getting your food. I'm pretty vanilla when it comes to this, and I just get it from the large store, but you can certainly find some small shops that have very good prices. That hasn't been my experience, and I think there's a level of efficiency that comes with large stores, but your experience may be completely different. You can also grow your own food and just generally think of special sources of getting food. Another thing that helped me is adopting intermittent fasting, which means having periods when you fast longer than the 8 hours of sleep that people normally do. And my particular version of it is one of the more extreme ones where I either eat within a 4-hour window or I just eat once during the day and have a really large meal. It's an interesting strategy that you might want to research and look into. What it does from this perspective is that it really simplifies what you will eat because you only eat one large meal. So I only have to prepare food and do the dishes and all that one time per day. So these are my tips on how to save money on your food, how to have an efficient food budget. The $2 in the title are not fake. This is approximately the amount of money that I spend every day on food. It comes out at around $60 depending on circumstances, and it is absolutely achievable. But even if you don't go this extreme, you can definitely cut some of your expenses and put that money to perhaps a better use. And of course, as I said, if eating out and eating expensive foods is something that's very important to you and something that you really enjoy, there's nothing wrong in having a large food budget either. Thank you for listening to the Valiant Growth podcast, and I dare you to flourish today. If you want to help out the show and help other people save money on their food budgets, please share this show wherever you fancy. Also, a bit of news, the show is now available very widely, and I would like to draw some attention to that. So if your platform of choice is YouTube, we've got a channel there. If you want to follow the page, like and follow the page on Facebook, there's a page on Facebook. Both of them are named Valiant Growth. There's a website where you can usually find the show notes, www.valiantgrowth.com. And the podcast is also listed in iTunes and Stitcher, and you will generally find it in Android-based applications and in general podcast directories.